Hi everyone, I'm George Boretos, co-founder and co-CEO of CubeRM. For those of you who have been watching us during the past few months, you've seen that we have posted tons of new information regarding the tendering market. And today is no exception. Together with Dr. Steve Laborda, the CEO of Valuebizbooster, we are going to expand on a very interesting subject, the tender maturity status of the manufacturing market. Before we start, a couple of things about our companies. So CubeRM is a specialized software vendor. What we do, we help companies empower and reinvent their tendering business using an advanced AI software platform covering end-to-end all aspects of tendering, from tender discovery to qualification, preparation, approvals, everything until the final awardation and complete 360 review and monitoring of the tendering business. Using and leveraging new AI advanced technologies like natural language processing and machine learning for price optimization. So I'm handing over to Steve to say a couple of things about himself and also his company. Steve?
Yep. Welcome everybody also from my end. So I'm Steve Laborda. I'm the CEO of Valuebizbooster. And what we do at Valuebizbooster is supporting B2B companies, especially in the industrial manufacturing and the chemical industry, to develop their commercial excellence. So meaning all the aspects around sales and marketing excellence, including pricing, tender excellence, of course, value selling as well, though all supported by change management. So I'm happy to have you reach out to me if you want to learn more about it.
Thanks, Steve, for joining. Again, everyone for attending. So let's start with a couple of logistics. The webinar is, of course, recorded. The overall presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. And we will have more time in the end, a quarter of an hour, 10 to 15 minutes for questions. You can use the Q&A button. Please be careful to use the Q&A button, not the chat button, in order to ask any question that you might have. And in the end, we will try to answer everything. And of course, after we end this presentation, you will receive in a few days an email with details to download the presentation recording and also the slide deck of this session. So first of all, let's see what this report and presentation is all about. We are capturing mostly the European market and, of course, the manufacturing sector. And what we will be seeing is two aspects of the tendering market. First of all, the tender maturity or the readiness of the market in various different aspects of the tendering business, and also of the importance of the key elements in tendering. And then we'll try to combine all this and have some key takeaways. And of course, in the end, we'll have some time for questions as discussed before. Now, let's talk a bit about the market, first of all. The tendering market is an important market. It's a big market. As you can see, for all sectors around Europe, we're counting just the European Union. So you understand the tendering market is even bigger than we present here, is more than $500 billion. So indeed, a very big market. And it consists of hundreds of thousands of new tenders issued and published from different contracting authorities all around Europe every year. And this business is growing steadily for the past few years. And even if we go and deep dive into the manufacturing sector alone, still it's a big growing business. So you can see that we are talking about tens of billions of value of tenders published every year. And it's almost 60,000 or more of new tenders that are issued by the public contracting authorities, again, just in the EU, and of course, specifically for the manufacturing sector. But that's only an argument towards the importance of the market. The market is big. The market is, of course, growing. So it's a definitely interesting market. However, it is also a very demanding market for a couple of reasons. First of all, tendering has some unique characteristics. For instance, there is a myth that all tenders are about decreasing prices. Obviously, this is a big aspect. And of course, the price element in the evaluation of tenders is, of course, important. However, in the manufacturing sector, and that goes for many other sectors as well, almost 2/3 of the tenders issued out there every year have also a combination of quality criteria combined, of course, with pricing. So the evaluation is practically a balanced scorecard based on price, partly, but also several quality criteria. It could be just one, or in many cases, it could be hundreds of different quality criteria, spanning everywhere from supply to product specifications or anything else. That's very different per country, but also very different per contracting authority. That, of course, creates some additional complexity because it's not simply all about price. It's about all the other elements that gets into the equation of the evaluation of the tender. On top of that, you have to chase against time. Because as you can see, the average time between the initial publication of the tender and the submission, the official submission deadline for the tender, usually it's just a few weeks. We're talking about 39 days. And this is not just for the manufacturing sector, by the way, this is for most sectors and for more countries inside or outside Europe. This is considered a norm. There are deviations, of course, but not a lot. And that's important. Why? Imagine if you have a big tender, multi-million tender, which is very frequent. Imagine if this tender is like the tenders that we described here that combine also price with quality criteria. So it's a complex tender, possibly involving many people. Sometimes tenders have a team of 10, 20, 30 people, external or internal partners and colleagues working together to pursue the tender. And imagine if you have just a few weeks to pursue that. Obviously, it's almost impossible. However, it is what it is. That's the reality. And that adds an additional complexity and an additional challenge in pursuing tenders. So all in all, a very big, important and growing and very interesting market. However, it's also a very challenging. And it's not that tendering is just for some specific countries that happen to get involved in tendering and all others simply ignore that. It's not at all like this. Actually, tendering is almost present in all countries, of course, with different levels of penetration. For instance, here you can see the top 10 countries in the EU in terms of tender activity, numbers of tenders. You can see that there is a lot of diversity, different levels of penetration. However, there is something going on in terms of public procurement, public tendering in all these countries and all the countries that we didn't include in this list. So there is a lot of activity and it spans geographically all around the world. Of course, there are countries that are more towards tendering and others that are not, but usually as a general rule, tendering is present almost everywhere around the world. Now, since we talked about tendering and we realized that it is a challenging market, let's think about and try to summarize the key challenges, some of the key challenges. There are many, obviously, some of the key challenges that we find out there in the market. So one of the most important challenges is, of course, the big question. Did we discover all the relevant tenders? Do we have access to all the relevant tender opportunities that are out there relevant to our business or no? And usually the answer is no. Usually you are missing something. The companies are missing something. They are continuously pursuing to advance their visibility of tenders. But even if you find a relevant tender means that the tender mentions something that you can sell, your products, not necessarily your products, I mean your product category or something like that. Even so, sometimes you pursue it. Why is that? Let's say that you have a product for a specific tender, however, you know that this is an almost impossible tender to win because simply there is a lot of competition out there. You will lose a lot of time and based on your past experience, you almost never win this tender. So perhaps you will prioritize this tender lower than other tenders when you have bigger chances to succeed. And also the other way around, sometimes you can win a tender, but you know that you have to lower your prices a lot, and therefore your profitability as well. So perhaps, again, it's not a very important tender. And other things may happen as well. Perhaps everything is in place. It's a great tender. You have great chances of winning. You have big profitability because you are going to charge a premium price and customer will accept that. But simply you don't have enough supply capacity for the specific tender. They will ask for, let's say, 1,000 items for something, a device you are manufacturing, You simply have available just 500 for the time where this is needed. So there are multiple criteria that you need to also factor in this equation, let's call it like that, in order to evaluate and mostly to prioritize all your tender or your relevant tender opportunity. We talked about the fight against time. Of course, if we have especially the biggest and most complex tenders, just a few weeks between the publication and the official deadline to submit our proposal, and tenders usually tend to be complex. They have tons of documents and so on and so forth. Yes, it's a fight against time, so definitely a big challenge. And for that, it's very important to be able to anticipate. So this is one of the biggest challenges that people involved in tendering have. Since we don't have enough time to prepare, then we need to be able to anticipate tenders before they are officially published. Yeah, but this is easier said than done. So again, a big challenge to anticipate tenders and being able to plan ahead. And finally, and that's perhaps the biggest question, do we know our competitors well? Because tenders are competitive by nature. You compete in a structured way with a structured balance scorecard, combining pricing and quality criteria against your potential competitors. So first, do you know your competitors well? Can you anticipate their behavior, their pricing? Do you know their products, their quality structure, the potential score? Do you know all these things? And based on all these things, possibly others, and your gut feeling, can you understand what's the best price to bid? Well, the answer in most cases is no, or so and so. It's always suboptimal, or perhaps it's not there at all. So all these are just examples of many, many different challenges that we have in the tendering business. And there are a lot. And there are a lot, and all this, they stand against us achieving tender excellence and achieving and reaching the next level in our the development and further revenue stability or whatever other KPI we have in our mind evolution. So it is important to understand how we measure tender excellence and how we measure success. What are the key elements that are important for our success in tendering? Because this is where we will base all our analysis from now on, and the report that we will present with the readiness of the market, but also the importance of all these different factors. What we have done here, and this is something that for any one of you who have seen even one of our presentations, sort of a trademark, we say it again and again, it's the standard tender cycle, standard common sense tendering process. Of course, we use this tendering process because we have developed different functionalities for our software. Our software platform is constructed this way. However, this is how tendering has been done. Usually, what you usually do in the beginning is start to try, at least attempt to discover new tender opportunities, relevant tender opportunities. And then you try to qualify, to prioritize them for relevance, of course, but also for their expected profitability, if it is an easy, quick win or not, supply limitations that you might have, and so on and so forth. And eventually, based on this bit guidance or qualification/disqualification process, eventually you select some of the tenders that are relevant to you and you pursue them. Once you start pursuing them, of course, you start preparing your tender response and eventually evaluating what? Your chances of winning the specific tender against your competitors based on all the quality or other criteria and evaluation rules for the specific tender. And of course, identifying the best possible price to go and pursue this specific tender. And then you get your internal approvals, obviously, and eventually you submit your proposal. And then in the end, you wait. You wait for what? For the award. Hopefully to your company, but sometimes not. Of course, it's a competitive game. But you need to capture everything in order to have a 360 view of what is happening, in order to get better and better at each turn of the tender cycle. So all this is just a framework of analysis and the standard way that usually most of the companies are doing business. And this is exactly what we will use in order to measure our tender readiness and then measure the importance of all these steps as well. So having said all that, I'm coming over to Steve in order to describe the first part of our report, which is the readiness of the manufacturing market in all these steps. Steve, you have the stage.
Thanks a lot, George. And for all the participants, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A so that we can address those at the end of the session. And so let's start with the maturity, the readiness in the industrial manufacturing. And before I start, let's just keep 3 numbers in mind. I'm going to open up at the end of that part of the presentation. So have a look if you find out what is the 72, what is the 7 and the 2 meaning in this readiness or maturity aspects. So how has it been done? So we have been running a tendering maturity assessment using a tool with 24 questions. And if you as a participant haven't done it, as we're going to share the material with you, you can still benchmark yourself afterwards and see where do you stand. So we have been evaluating various aspects and we're going to show you a few of them. In those aspects, we have been looking also at different levels of performance, but we're going to go more in details in a minute. So we looked also a bit just to share with you a bit about the demographic of the participants. So you see, we have about 72% who are directly in a tendering function and 28 which are others. Obviously, tenders are not in all companies handled by a dedicated tender team. Sometimes it's on the marketing side, sometimes in sales, or pricing even sometimes. So no worries, but you see quite a lot of people have a dedicated role there. And if you look at the size of the company, you see that we have mainly larger companies. So 2/3 with up to 1,000 employees and 1/3 about over 10,000 employees. So quite significant companies having most of the time, obviously, processes in place. So what we have been looking as well in this assessment is to see what is the stage of the company answering. So we're categorizing typically in three buckets, if you want. The reactive ones, the coordinated one, and the strategic one. And obviously moving from reactive to strategic, you are increasing your maturity. And so what does it mean being reactive? It means that you have some of the aspects of tendering in place, but it's not working that optimally. Coordinated, it's improved, of course. You have some things that are working well and some other parts which are maybe not that optimal. And then the strategic one, I wouldn't say close to perfection because you have always to improve, though they have most of the steps and the business under control and it's working well. So if we look at that on an overall perspective on the answers, you see that the overall maturity is about 72%, so which works quite well compared to other industries we have benchmarked, so it's quite close. It's always ranging in that area. Though you will see on the next slide as well that even you have an average, you will see quite discrepancies across the different answers. And so if you will recognize the 7 steps that George has presented us. So the discovery, the qualification, the preparation, the evaluation, the approvals and submission, as well as governance. And you see that even you have an average of 72, you see that, for instance, evaluation and governance are the 2 low performers in a sense overall in the answers. So it seems that most of the answers or the participant of the survey or the maturity assessment have a gap here on the evaluation and governance, which is somehow, of course, challenging because as we heard, I mean, evaluating the tender is key because it's important to understand where do you stand. Are you going to win the tender or not? Do you have the right price level as well? Because at the end, it might be that you leave money on the table. Yeah. So what does it mean? I mean, if you are underpricing because you believe that you need to go that low, and suddenly you win and you see the answer of your number 2, which is maybe 15% higher than you wonder why did you go so deep, right? So those things need to be considered and need to be well set. Yeah, and the governance, it's a bit the same story. It's a waste of resources at the end if you don't have a clear process describing how to work. And as you heard from George also, the 39 days. So if you don't have a process that is working properly, you are wasting time in setting up the process every time. And that, of course, can reduce your chance to win as well. So therefore, I see it quite critical that those two are kind of low. If we look now at the variation or the distribution across the different steps, you see that even some like qualification have a good average actually, or even approvals and preparation. You see that the answers are quite scattered. So you get some people having scores underneath 60, which means that their level of maturity is rather low. So you see that there's still some room for improvement. So if you highlight those, so it's about qualification, preparation, the evaluation obviously is low in general, and the approvals as well are kind of scattered. So many companies here have some room of improvement from that perspective. If we go a bit deeper in also the preparation part, is that when we look at how the companies are really gathering competitive intelligence, you see that more than 60% are on the reactive side. And that really is a key challenge, because if you think about it, in many organizations, a tender is seen as a single event. But actually, if you are an expert or if you are a professional on tenders, you understand quite quickly that it is more a strategical exercise. So you can't look at the tender in isolation. So you need to have the understanding of what have been the previous prices, for instance. So not only the previous one, but the previous ones, so several before. You need to understand what is actually the capacity or the capabilities to handle that project of your competitors. Because think about it, if your competitor is already fully loaded, either from a product production capacity or even from a project perspective, so they don't have resources to handle those projects, I mean, there is no need to have a very aggressive price if they do it right, because they will not be able to handle it. The same thing if you look at the other side of the coin, meaning that if you don't have any capacity, there is no need to underbid from a price perspective. So that means you put a price tag which is higher because you want to anchor that high price. Otherwise, you might get the customer expecting in the next round of tender a lower price again. So that might complicate your price discussions and your chance to win. And linked to that, of course, is to build on that competitive intelligence and to create bid scenarios. And you see also here half of the answers are actually on the reactive side. Though it's interesting to see that still 1/3 is on the strategic side. So you see quite two extremes here. But it's really key to understand. I mean, a tender, it's not like flipping a coin. So if you have the right insights, you can really define a better understanding on your chance to win. Yeah. And that's important as well, because it might be even in an early stage that you realize actually there's no chance for you to win. So maybe you don't invest too much resources and time in answering that tender. So if we look at another aspect is the planning ahead, so which is linked to the resources in a sense, is that you see also there that many organizations are not anticipating tenders. So again, more than 50%, so almost 60% are on the reactive end. And there also, it's kind of a challenge. I mean, in many businesses, you have, first of all, recurring tenders. So you can kind of define almost when the next tender is going to be published. That's one aspect. And then, of course, the ones that are not yet published, even they are not recurring, can be well planned, and you can adjust your resources and your priorities there. Yeah. And so that's one aspect. And then, of course, to optimize your resources, and even though you saw the tender business is kind of local in many places, the teams that work on that are not necessarily local. They might be regional or even global, and that means you need to well allocate the resources and the performance or effectiveness of that team. So that means you need to have a very smooth process. So still here, it's surprising also that, again, 56% are actually more reactive, so that they are starting to collect the information, the data that they need when the tender is already on the table, either physically or virtually. And there you have a big potential to improve, in a sense, either by avoiding to frustrate or even burn out your teams, or to reduce the size of your teams by making them more effective. So let's open up now quickly what those three numbers are. So the 72% you might have recognized, that's the tender readiness or the maturity. The 7 phases, so that's the 7 phases that you heard already from George and that we assessed also in the maturity. And as you might have recognized, the evaluation and the governance were the two that are below average in the maturity assessment. So I'll hand over to George for the next part on the importance of the different phases in the tender process.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So Steve just presented right now what? He presented the readiness of the market in all those 7 steps that were identified and described before. But how important are all these steps? So this is the poll that we have right now. Usually we have done this before, so we have some answers and we'll compare it with your answers as well. So what you see right now, you can freely start putting in your answers, are all the different 7 steps that we described before: discovery, qualification, preparation, all the way down to governance. You can pick one or more. I will leave a minute or so to have a chance to put your answers here. And there is no, right or wrong answer, because these are personal or company-specific things. Something that we will say again and again, have said again and again in presentations and discussions with companies, is that all these reports are great as a starting point to have some general benchmarks. That's just to give you a flavor, taste of the market. But other than that, obviously, each company is a different thing. You have a different starting point, possibly different targets, possibly different aspirations. And of course, you have a private, let's say personalized, company-wise, tender excellence journey. So we'll see some answers here. We'll compare them with what we have from other report, another poll that we did, but that's all there is to it. Don't stick to it 100%. Anyway, I think that we had a minute or so, so we have some answers, and well, it's a tie. It's a tie, and it's interesting because it's a tie between some. I'm sure that now you can see the results. The results that we have right now, it's qualification, preparation, and evaluation. Surprisingly, we don't have discovery. Let's see what were the similar results that we had from another group that we ran recently. So as you can see, many of the results are the same. So preparation, evaluation is definitely there, but also discovery. For us, because we are in discussion with many different customers or potential customers, and we see their pain points and what they consider important or not, we always see something like that. If you think about it, see the ranking over here. You will see that there are 2 categories of steps. There are things that we can do to improve our efficiency, not necessarily being more successful in finding tenders or winning more tenders, but we can be more efficient. For instance, having a better approval process or a better submission process. These are procedural things, important, but there are procedural. The same for governance. Governance is somewhere in between. It's the learning curve, which makes it more distinct and more sophisticated. But of course, it's a process to capture all the important information to get better again and again. So as you can see, the things that have to do with our efficiency and its improvement rank lower. It's, let's say, a second priority. Let's call it like that. And everything that has to do with winning more tenders, identifying more tenders, preparing better and pursuing the right tenders, evaluating our price or anything else, qualifying, disqualifying the right tenders. I mean, all the things that have to do not with our efficiency, but now with our effectiveness in pursuing, discovering, and winning eventually more tenders. These are the things that rank first. And again, it's normal, it's to be expected, it's something that we see again and again. And if we move forward a bit, here we try to summarize everything. The results of the poll that you've seen before, and which is the importance that you see here for all the different steps, for all the different elements, and also the readiness. So this helps us combine the two words, what's important and how we rank. Again, we're talking about a benchmark and the average of the market. It's in every company. It's a completely different thing, as we've seen through the presentation and through the results that Steve shared, and we'll see it again and again. There's a lot of diversity and lots of differences between companies. However, if we stick to what we see right now, the average benchmark, we can draw some very, very easy conclusions. And I will start with the easy ones. Let's start with approvals. Approvals, again, it's an efficiency thing. Is it important? So and so. We agree. It is important, obviously. You need to have that. It's a matter of discipline. Let's say you have to have control. Of course, it's important, but obviously, it's not the most important thing in the world. It's just a must have. So it's ranked low. However, you see that our average tender maturity and readiness in the approval processes is quite high. It's slightly above average or anyway near the average. And why is that? Because it's a quick win. It's easy to have an approval. Many tools are out there that have approval processes. Or it's easy to have even some minimum approval processes. It's not such a big win. It's important, but it's easier to implement. It's easier to deploy. You have to have an initiative for that, but it's easier to do that. And it seems that most companies have done that, at least to some extent. This is what we see in other sectors as well, by the way. It's of a less important element. It's an element of less importance. However, most companies are, if not quite there, almost there. Qualification. Now, qualification is obviously a different thing, because in the qualification, you really can achieve things. And I have to tell that for the manufacturing sector, it was a bit of a surprise based on the results that we have from other sectors, that we didn't see a higher score in terms of importance. What is not a surprise is that most companies are so and so. They are almost at average. There is definitely a lot of room for improvement there, but again, it's on average in terms of importance. Preparation, we've seen that, and it was part of your answers as well. It's definitely a very, very important thing, a very, very important element, because this is where you start preparing your tender response. Of course, it is important. Of course, it is critical for our success. Although it's so important, of course, still, as you can see, we're near the average. We don't excel. Actually, we don't excel in anything. But I think the most important elements where we can really draw some conclusions, some more important conclusions, are those three: discovery, governance, and evaluation. Why is that? Discovery is ranked in most of the polls that we can. This is cross-industry. This is for every industry that we know. Discovery, usually it's the first one. If it's not the first one, it's very close to being one of the first one or two top priorities. And why is that? For obvious reasons. If you don't discover all the relevant tenders, then from the beginning you are losing opportunities. Definitely you are losing revenues, profitabilities, market share. You start losing from the beginning of the process. It's the foundation, in other words. So, of course, it's a no-brainer that it is one of the most important factors of success. And where do we stand right now? Almost at average. Well, someone would say that, okay, we're on average. It's an important factor. Perhaps we could do better, but no hard feelings. It's not like that. When something is so important, you should excel on. You should excel in everything that is of top importance. So for discovery, if we were to achieve our tender excellence journey, to be in the end of it, if there is an end-to-end tender excellence journey, then we should be somewhere here to have an 80, to have a 90, to have something much, much better. So I think there is a very, very solid and concrete conclusion here that discovery is definitely important and deserves better than just an average ranking in terms of tender readiness. we should definitely, and I'm talking about most companies, I'm talking about the manufacturing sector, and I'm talking about other sectors as well, because again, we have seen that elsewhere. We should definitely work more in order to improve this considerably. Let me move here. I'm leaving evaluation for last. I think it's perhaps the most important conclusion of all. It's governance. Governance, it's of medium importance. Yes, it's important, definitely, because this is where you learn again and again from each turn of the tender cycle. But that's all there is to it. You get better, of course, but there are also other more important things that you can do in order to excel in tendering. Definitely an important factor. Where do we rank in terms of tender readiness? Awful, much lower than the average. And this is a big surprise. Why? Because governance is much easier to achieve. I mean, if you think about it, the two prerequisites to have governance could be some dashboards, let's say, some tables or some reports where we aggregate the information for our tender performance. It could be something as simple as that. So we don't have governance where all we need is two things: to have a tender repository, to have everything in one place, to have a single place or source of truth, as we say, and then to aggregate, to do something with this information, to aggregate this information and to start creating dashboards, other results, and so on and so forth. And I'm not talking about sophisticated statistical processing or machine learning. This comes afterwards, and it's normal to anticipate to do that, of course, but it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about simple reports, simple BI, simple dashboards, simple things that were invented 30, 40 years ago. And it seems that we don't even do that. So that's a shame. I don't know what to say. That's a shame because it's not perhaps the most important element of all, but it is important. It could have been a quick win, and it's not. So we should do definitely something about it. But I think perhaps the most critical conclusion or the most important conclusion is the evaluation. And why is that? Definitely one of the most important elements of success. I mean, think about it. In tendering, in order to win more, you need to what? You need to anticipate your competitors' behavior, their pricing, your chances of winning. So that's what? That's statistical analysis. That's machine learning. That's evaluation. This is what is all about. This is why it's considered one of the most critical elements of success, because simply it is. And you see where we rank in terms of tender readiness? Nothing. Very low. Actually, it's the lowest of all factors. It's one of the best or most important factors, and it's low. It seems that it's low for only one reason, because it's difficult. It's difficult because there you need machine learning. There you need to optimize pricing, statistical process, predictive models. You need all sorts of things that are easier said than done. So, yeah, I do understand. We all understand why this hasn't happened yet, why this is very difficult. However, we definitely needed to do something about evaluation. So I would say, just to conclude this slide over here, those three elements are perhaps some of the most important elements in order to draw some conclusions. However, having said that, in all areas, definitely we have area for improvement. We have room for significant improvement. So trying to summarize everything that we've seen today. First of all, as we've seen from the presentation from Steve, the average score for everything, for all of the different factors, is near 72%. It's not extremely low, obviously, but it's nothing spectacular either. And there is a lot of diversity. Although the average is 72%, you see that the companies, all the companies that participated in this survey, their scores span from very low as 39%, to as high as 100%. Of course, we understand that the edges, let's say, are outliers and possibly not 100% there, as they are presented by the companies. However, there is a lot of diversity, and this is something that we see in life sciences, chemical industry, in many other industries as well. It's a global thing, and it's what we keep saying to all companies, to all our customers, to all our potential customers. There is no one size fits all. And the same goes, and I will keep repeating that, even for the reports that we provide. They're not to be taken for granted. The report says so, then that's all there is to it. You have to customize your tender excellence journey. You have to understand exactly what's the situation for you. That's a nice starting point. It gives you some boundaries, some limits, what's considered quoted normal in the market at an average level, but that's all there is to it. Then you have to explore, then you have to measure internally, and then you have to see if, yes, the average of the market is 72%, but what am I? Am I towards closer to the 39, which is the lower, or towards the 100? Then you will have different strategies, then you will have different policies, then you will have a different mindset of how to deal with all the challenges. And there is a potential improvement for everything, regardless of how well you perform to each and every of the steps. There are always things that you can do in order to improve it even better. And we've seen that a lot. The approvals, the discovery, the evaluation. I mean, the evaluation or the discovery are the obvious things, because we know that most people, most companies don't score very well there, and it's obvious that they can improve. But even in other things like governance, for us, it's obvious we can improve there, even if we think that we are okay the other way around. Anticipation. This is something that was mentioned by Steve, and I want to overemphasize that because we think it's critical. It's what we said before. Tendering is a fight against time. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to submit our proposal after the official publication. So to be able to anticipate an unpublished tender and plan ahead, and there are ways to do so, is critical. But it seems that the market is lagging towards that aspect. And again, this is something that we see in other sectors as well. And it's perhaps one of the most critical elements of success out there, to be able to understand what is happening in the market, what lies ahead, what most likely is going to be published in the market. You can never be 100% sure, but at least based on some cyclicality that tenders tend to have, there is some predictability, and you should take advantage of. And finally, we see that evaluation and governance, unfortunately, score lower in terms of tender readiness. And for both of them, definitely there is significant room for improvement. Why is that? For governance, because the learning curve will start there in tracking down what happened, what went wrong, or well, or whatever, because we need to be better and better for each and every turn of the tender cycle. And for the evaluation, again, it's obvious. It's the predictive intelligence. It's also the competitive intelligence. All the things that we can factor in order to understand, are we about to win or lose this tender? And is our pricing great or not? Should factor all this in. And of course, evaluation and governance can help us in all these aspects. So all in all, a great, important, very, very interesting, but also very challenging market. This is what tendering is all about. In terms of tendering readiness, we are so and so. And definitely, we should do more because the benefits are great based on what we are going to do in order to improve our tendering business. And having said all that, it's time to stop for some questions. So let's see if we have any questions in the Q&A, and let's start exploring some answers. Okay, so I will start. Yeah, we have some. I think, Steve, perhaps the first one is for you.
Okay.
Answer that. It's actually a very general question, but I think it's also a very fair question. What do you consider to be the most important areas? I guess that areas means steps, most likely, or anyway, that someone should focus on in terms of tender excellence. I'm complementing that, the last part.
I mean, I think you need to look at two aspects. One is, of course, what is the stage of the company where you stand, but and then the ease of implementation in a sense. And if you look at what can quickly give you a good impact or a quick impact, actually, if you think about it, and we talked about it a few times, is of course the discovery, because if you miss a tender, I mean, if you miss a tender, you are not able to answer, so you are not going to create any revenue or profit on it. And then the other part is obviously all the parts related to the process and the governance, because as you said, I mean, even I have been now for many years in this tender business, these 39 days, it still surprised me. If you think about the complexity that you have behind certain tenders, to have only 39 days to make that happening on a cross-functional way, maybe across regions or across countries, across departments, to get the right answer. I think, yeah, you could look at governance. The approvals is kind of giving a good aspect. Then, of course, I mean, I'm not going to list all of those, but then the evaluation you highlighted as well is a very important one, but maybe a bit more complex because you need to gather in data, and that's not always that easy. So I don't know if you, George, you see some others, but I would then say, yeah, the discovery, the governance, and the evaluations as kind of the top ones.
I totally agree with the general remark about the importance of these factors because they are extremely important. I would just add something which has to do with the personalization, the tender excellence journey and the focus areas. It's different for everyone, for anyone. So I would say that those factors where you don't excel, but you feel they are important for your company, this is definitely where you should invest. But then you should factor in how easy it is or not to achieve tender excellence in those factors. Sometimes the gains are great, but also the investment is huge or the risk is huge. So perhaps you shouldn't go for that. So again, it's a personalized game. So you need to personalize your strategy and also personalize your focus areas. Although generally speaking, I do agree that discovery, evaluation, governance, usually these rank very, very high in the top priorities, let's say, for customers to move forward. I see another question about how much time will it take to start having results following actions or initiatives that we're taking to improve any of the steps that you mentioned. So, in other words, how much time do I have to wait until I see some decent results for what I did? If you don't mind, I can take that, Steve,
Yeah. Go ahead,
because we have experience also from implementations and customers and how long it took them to get something out of the deployment and the initiatives. Again, it depends on what you are doing. You can do more or less, easier or more complex or trickier things. So you can wait more time or less time. But I would say that as an average, usually it will take at least 3 months or so to have something, some first results based on whatever you have done. Let's say deploy a new system to track down tenders, to improve your discovery, or to have a better governance with a tender repository or something like that. Usually it takes 2, 3, 4 months, something like that, to deploy this system, to conclude your initiative and at least start gaining some first benefits out of it. But then it can span over a year or even 2 years, depending on how many things you want to do, how complicated these things are. Is a different thing to set up a governance system, a great BI system, and different things to set up a predictive system with sophisticated machine learning and AI algorithms. Obviously, the latter will take more time to experiment, to test everything, to deploy, to start digesting, to communicate or to interact, to learn how to interact between people, say the salespeople in tendering, and the machine generating some automated estimates and so on and so forth. Also, it depends on the number of countries. Because tendering is so country specific. So if you involve more countries, then obviously you prolong the deployment time and therefore you wait for more time until you get more results. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything on that.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the maturity of the company as well. I mean, if you think about a company who has really just started to look at tenders and has a hard time to make discovery, I think the impact can be quite quick from that perspective. But I agree with you. Overall, it takes a bit of time depending on the complexity, I would say, and what you're trying to achieve. And how many steps you are working on as well out of the whole process.
So I can see another question, and I think, Steve, it's definitely for you. And it's a very common, let's say, question. We get it a lot, lots of times. What's more important, to have the right technology or technologies or the right people?
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and of course, it doesn't apply only to tender excellence. It applies to many many other tools. And I would start with a quote that I like. Yeah, a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? So that explains that. Yeah, a tool can help, but you need to know what you're doing. Yeah, so actually, both are important. So you need to have the right people understanding what they're doing around tenders, and you need to have the tools that facilitate all that. Yeah, because I think a tool is there to bring the things that are cumbersome for the users or the organization. Yeah, so to facilitate the whole thing, and so you need to have the right people looking at the right data, the right process in an easy manner. So I would say both, of course, are important.
I agree. By the way, it's very important. Actually, we have something like a saying within our company. We say it's important to establish a human-computer interaction. So computer means the technology, and human means the people involved in the process. If you involve them in an efficient and effective way, then this interaction will create great results. If you have them isolated, then usually you don't get a lot out of it. So I fully agree. Uh, so one more question. Does it make sense to invest gradually or in bulk, holistically, for a solution that covers all? So should you go by step, or should you go all the way and do all things in one shot? Steve, do you want to answer this?
I can try to give an answer. Let's see what you are going to say about it, George, from your experience. I would say um, overall, I would always go from a gradual way, from a change management perspective also, because otherwise you are overwhelming the organization. And you can, I mean, it's like the elephant. So I like to look in pictures, right? So trying to eat an elephant, you need to eat it by pieces, yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't work, yeah. And so you need to eat it in chunks that are digestible by the organization also, yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, also especially when you have a higher complexity, many countries, many sources. You need to do it step by step and show the adoption and get the quick wins and then the success is happening because that will help you also from an implementation perspective to get more and more people on board. So I don't know if you share that experience, George, but at least I have seen that that is the way that is working, even though sometimes I have seen people also putting all in like at the casino, yeah, pushing all the coins in the middle of the table, but that's an occasion that is not that often happening.
Uh, More or less, yes. More or less, yes. I'm with you. Um, there's only one thing to consider more. It's the size of the deployment or the scope of the deployment. Sometimes it's a small scope anyway. It's a narrow scope anyway. So in this case, yes, you might do more things in one step because it's easier. But if we're talking about something relatively bigger, more countries, more things, more initiatives, more capabilities, for instance, involved, I never seen a bigger deployment happening in one shot, not once in my life. And I think that there's a good reason, exactly as you said, because the risk of destroying everything and not getting everything from the first time, not getting everything right from the first time, it's huge. So you need to segment it to phases. You need to test the first phase, have some learnings, and then go to the next one, be more knowledgeable, and adapt accordingly. And this way you have a better result and a safer result. So, generally speaking, yes, with an exception of some smaller cases, yes, obviously you can do more. Okay, I can see one more question. So the question is, how much improvement, I guess business improvement, should we accept from this kind of initiatives? Steve, if you don't mind, I think I can take this one because we have our experience with customers, and we see how this goes when you deploy a system, regardless of the capabilities of the countries, and eventually you wait for some results. First of all is what's the improvement that you expect to see? There are different KPIs that customers see. It's the tender visibility. Do I discover more tenders than I used to before the system or the initiative was deployed? How big can this be? Depends, of course, on your starting. If you were great and you want just to mildly improve, it could be just 0.5% or 1%. If you were nowhere, you're almost blind, and you just deployed something, a system, then it's 100%. Whatever. But anyway, these are extremes. Usually what we see, because usually companies do have something, and they want to improve somewhat the tender visibility. I would say that improving by a single digit, but strong single digit, like 4 or 5 or 6%, their tender visibility, discover more tenders. This is what I mean. This is usually possible. It can get lower or much, much better, depending again on the starting point of the company. So that's one KPI that usually companies look after to improve. The second is, of course, revenue. Now, revenue goes hand by hand, of course, tender discoverability, but also with increasing your success rates, your winning rates, and also improving your pricing as well. So all this can improve your revenue. So revenue can improve even more than 5%. If tender discoverability is 5, then revenue could improve by 7%, for instance. Just indicative figures. Again, each company is a completely different case, but just giving some things that we've seen them in the market. But what's important, and this has to do usually with the pricing structure and also the price optimization, which is obviously the evaluation part, is the improvement in pricing. So there you could see an improvement of 2-3 percentage points, for instance. But that's important. Why? Because this is bottom line. If you improve your pricing, you just improve your revenue. Obviously, you improve your bottom line as well. So that's great. And you can definitely do that. Of course, there you need the more sophisticated tools like the evaluation, the machine learning, all the predictive tools that can help you optimize price. But in the end, if you get a 3% increase in your profit margin, of course, that's a big gain, and most companies are really eager to do so. So I can see that we are running out of time. So I think it's time to say our goodbye, Steve, to everyone, and thank you everyone for attending our webinar once more. We are sharing information about the tender market. In this case, we shared information about the readiness and importance of several factors of success within the tendering market, especially for manufacturing. We're together with Steve Laborda from Valuebizbooster. So from me, QBRM, Steve, Valuebizbooster, thank you again for watching this, and we'll see you soon in one of our future webinars. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, George.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Steve.